What is the mission of the National School of Public Administration in Brazil? How does it shape, enhance, and educate Brazil's public servants? And what can we learn from their experiences? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Diogo Costa, president of the National School of Public Administration in Brazil. So could you tell us a little bit more about the history and mission of the National School of Public Administration in Brazil? How did it begin and how has its mission evolved to date?
The school began in 1986 with this promise of modernizing Brazil's public sector. It was created, inspired by ENAP in France. And with it, it had its mission to serve, as it was stated, to serve the public service of the future. It was to develop new careers and to bring new competencies to Brazil's public sector. But it began inspired by ENAP, which until its closure just recently in France, with this more modest mission of building capacity within a specific high-level career. But the school became much more open and, may I say, democratic than its inspiration. So through the years, it also accommodated other careers. It developed programs for a broader public, and it became the main school of government in the country. There are other schools of government within the federal government that are coordinated or articulated by ENAP, but ENAP became the main one. And in the past few years, ENAP acquired other competencies. It became a center for innovation and technology. Now we have master's programs, we have a doctorate program, and we've reached over 2 million students. So it became a much larger project than it was originally intended.
Diogo, I was wondering what your specific responsibilities and duties as president of the National School of Public Administration for Brazil. Perhaps you can share with us a week in the life of the president at the school.
We say that the school is based on a tripod of education, innovation, and research. So my main responsibility is to actually articulate all of that and to be able to integrate the knowledge we produce with research, with our educational pipelines, to make sure that our innovation work is also linked with capacity building. So usually we don't just do innovation as a consultant would, but we try to bring public officials to learn by doing these sorts of programs as well. And we also have this competency, this responsibility of working with different government agencies in helping them develop capacity building in their own agencies. So we have a national policy for development, and we articulate with these different agencies how we can best serve them, both for them to learn more transversal competencies that we have built for the past few years, but also to address the specific needs that they have in their tasks.
I want to highlight your strategic vision for the National School of Public Administration in Brazil. What's your vision? And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your priorities too.
Sure. Well, when we do capacity building, we're always thinking about administrative capacity or state capacity. We always think how our action is going to actually increase the capacity of government to do things and to increase the quality of government in general. This can sound a bit commonplace, but actually, I think it's one of the big challenges that we face in our times. You know, a country like Brazil used to be able to do magnificent projects. The city I'm talking from here, Brasilia, was built in about 40 months. And now when a bridge falls in the city, it takes almost half of that time to put that bridge back on. So I think Brazil has lost a lot of capacity when it comes to be able to take great projects. You know, we have at the time was the largest hydropower plant in the world, and today to build even a solar plant, it takes so long for us to be able to go through all the administrative and judicial processes. So we're always thinking about this, how we increase capacity in our actions. And to do that, we look at specific professions, careers, areas of government that need that extra boost of capacity through knowledge, through research, through innovation. We've worked a lot with the center of government in a way that the school hadn't worked before, to build a center of government that was also aligned and able to join OECD, for instance. This, I think, was one of our projects that we're also very happy with, because Brazil later on, after structuring the center of government and with many other actions that the center of government took, now has an invitation, a formal invitation to join the OECD. So I think a lot of our priorities here are determined by that, how increase administrative capacity in a country that used to have administrative capacity. You know, Michael, I was just looking at this, 1943, there was a MoMA exhibition on Brazil called Brazil Builds. And Brazil was being, it was a highlight of this modern world that was up and coming and able to build the new cities. The São Paulo, for instance, was a city that was growing fast. It was a city with a new downtown. But now São Paulo is a city that is unable to, for instance, to bury electric lines. The past mayors have tried to do this with different contracts, and they haven't been able to. So I think this is one of the main challenges that the country faces, and that we're trying to help different agencies and governments solve.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, and you alluded to it earlier, and it's the shaping the key competencies for public service. I'd like to focus on the map that you created. And can you tell us more about your efforts to identify those competencies, so what they are, and perhaps share with us what are some of the necessary skill sets and competencies required in Brazil or beyond to deliver the mission of public service?
Sure. So as we said first, this was just a big gap in Brazil. We simply didn't have any kind of mapping of competencies that the government as a whole should be focusing on. So what we did was, first, we sensibilized different agencies that was a problem that we need, and even the center of government, that we need to have competencies that every public servant is able to at least assess. And also how that would be important for any government that arrives and has a new vision, to be able to work with those competencies to enable that vision to actually become reality. So we worked with the center of government and then with different ministries around Brasilia, and we came up with competencies that were informed by what OECD countries were doing, but also adapted to the reality and the needs and the perceptions of Brazilian public servants. So we came up with the key competencies. The first one is database problem solving. And as I said, we produce a lot of data, actually, Michael. Alberto Alesina, who passed away, but he was in Brazil a year before or 2 years before of his passing. And he was saying that as a referee in journals, Brazil was the third largest number of data-informed papers that he's seen after US and Europe. So we produce a lot of data, but we don't use that data well to take decisions. So this was the first competency that we developed, actually a number of courseworks around it. Focusing on results for citizens. So as any government, there is a tendency sometimes to look inward, to see yourself as the client, as the end user, and forget the citizen. So this is also an effort we've put ourselves into applying. And then I'm just going to read the other ones: digital mindset, communication, teamwork, ethical values, and systemic view. And let me just touch on this last one, systemic view, which is also, I think, still a challenge. So we have a number of ministries, and it's very hard for them to take this strategic and systemic view of government as a whole. I think there's such drastic coordination challenges in Brazil, and we've tried to address those as well. So Brazil is a federation, so we have 27 states, and then we have over 5,000 municipalities. Each of them have the same kind of structure as any other. So that's very different from the US. So the city of São Paulo with 20 million people, they have the same structure as a small town of like 1,000 people. But that makes coordinating effort in government very challenging. And we've been trying to bring together managers of the different levels so they can see through the eyes of the different managers and have a better understanding of what the country as a whole is facing as challenges and how different levels of government can work together with other levels of government. So I think this is, for Brazil specifically, I think it's still a big challenge. And we also did a number of, we also came up with a matrix on competencies for leaders in Brazil. And then we have, just also going to list them very, very quickly, so it takes too much time. User value creation, crisis management, results management, networking and collaboration, team engagement, self-knowledge and personal development, strategic communication, innovation and change, and future thinking, which was what we were talking just before this.
Yeah, that's important. So, Diogo, I was wondering if there are any other key accomplishments you'd like to share, and more importantly, what does the future for the School of Public Administration in Brazil look like?
Sure. We're trying to change a bit of our business model to make us more flexible, as I said, to have more resources and more lines of resources, more revenue generation for our school in different ways. We're trying to work with this. There's a very bureaucratic problems that we have here that we're trying to solve. But I think in general, the school has become more and more online based. So when I arrived here in 2019, a lot of our students were still, it was almost half and half, being certified by online courses and by non-online courses, by offline courses. Now it's the number of online courses has reached 2.4 million students. We have active, as of this moment, 114,000 students, and this has been our average for the past year and a half, 2 years. So the future of the school is to keep growing online, and I think also to maybe have partners in other countries that also want to use our platform. It's open and it's very reliable, and also to become, I think, more and more ready for a more automated future. So we're trying to make sure that the innovations in Web3, which are basically institutional innovations, right? We associate a lot of this with like cryptocurrencies and business models, but a lot of those innovations can have profound effects in our institutions. So we also want to make sure that we understand them, that we regulate them right, and that we use them right as a government. And the same thing with artificial intelligence. We also see a big impact from in-IO tasks, Michael. As I was mentioning, my assistant here, when she needs to write an email in English, she doesn't write in English that well. She just tells GPT-3 in Portuguese, like write an email in English, inviting so-and-so to this event, and she has a first draft. So even from these very daily tasks to more complex tasks, as to create a website, create a landing page, those are all things that are drastically being changed. And we want to make sure that, as we said, the public sector is an augmented public sector. It can work really well with automation and to provide more public value through it.
What are the 3 or so key takeaways you'd like our listeners to know about the role you have and the school you lead?
Well, the first is how governments need schools of government. There's a book called The Fourth Revolution that begins saying how the Chinese state has changed a lot because of the Chinese schools of government. And I think that the roles of schools of government, maybe in the Western world, is still underrated. And schools can be a very great tool to change the culture of the public sector, to make sure that regulations actually are accompanied by a capacity to execute them. So implementation is still a big challenge, and schools of government can help a lot with that. And also to prepare the civil service to become more ready for these future challenges. But also, I think that there is, a big opportunity for more international connection between these schools of government. So OECD does, I think, a very good job, but I still think that there's a lot of room to improve and to share knowledge. A lot of our challenges are very similar in different countries, and different schools can, I think, help them, different national governments as well. We're talking about administrative capacity. I still think that this is also still an underrated challenge. We saw that for quite some time that both the right and the left in Western democracies had a view of how to control government, either fiscally or environmentally, and those are fine. I agree with those concerns. But now I think more people realize that we also have a challenge to build more. If you think about sustainability, for quite a while, the main challenges of making a more sustainable society is to make sure that human action doesn't build too much, doesn't pollute too much, doesn't destroy the environment. But now we see that we also want human action to build more electric vehicles, smart grids, solar and wind plants. It's a big challenge. We see these challenges everywhere. In the US, for instance, where we see the challenge that even a state like California has to come up to build new solar plants. There's a lot of like NIMBY mentality going on that still needs to be addressed. I think our transportation systems also have to improve quite a lot. Brazil has had challenges to make sure its rail system is up to any kind of standards, actually. But even the US, New York in 1900 was able to come up with, to build 28 metro stations in the span of, I think, less than a decade. And now in the 2000s, to come up with just a couple of new stations in Manhattan, it took 17 years. So I think a lot of state capacity is still a big challenge, and schools of government are good to help governments overcome that.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Diogo Costa, president of the National School of Public Administration in Brazil. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at Podcast One, iTunes, or on your favorite podcast app, and as always at businessofgovernment.org.